There's no bias there.
You may begin.
All right, thank you. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Dean of Academics, Dr. Ellen Barker, the Assistant Director of the Doctoral Program, Dr. Michael Fain, my committee chair, Dr. Warren Lerner, and my committee members, Dr. Lisa Giulianelli and Dr. Jason Pittman, for their help in getting to this point and for being here this evening. A bit of background on me. I began the doctoral program in 2013. I earned both my master's and bachelor's from American Military University in Information Technology, and most recently an Advanced Computer Security certificate from Stanford University. When not being a student, I'm an adjunct professor at Southern New Hampshire University and Bellevue University, where I teach Advanced Information Technology for graduate students and operating systems. By day, I'm the manager of internal risk and controls at Navy Federal Credit Union, where I've been for the last 18 years, the first 10 of which as a local area network engineer, and you'll hopefully hear some of that experience in the presentation I'm about to do now. So if I were to sum my study up into two words, all 40,000+ words, those two words would be measure it. Had I not taken Dr. Pittman's 810, I might have said something like prove it. But the goal of us as scholars is to measure and to apply the scientific method. So the big question that I had for my study, or the area to be investigated, was the extent to which existing network security devices can prevent exfiltration via network steganography. Now I'll provide some evidence for that tonight. So I'll begin with explaining what network steganography is. I'll explain its relevance. I'll also discuss the problems network steganography presents, my null and research hypotheses, the variables I use to measure cause and effect, the before and after study design, my study's outcomes and observations, and then I'll wrap up and answer any questions that any member of the audience may have. The network steganography, put simply, is the hiding of messages in protocol data units, also called headers. Anytime you open an email message or browse the web, there are thousands of packets that flow between the device you're using and the servers with which you're communicating. Those packets have control fields that identify you and identify your destination, as well as other information necessary to guide the packet along the way. Not all of those fields are used. And it's those unused fields that create an opportunity for what are called covert storage channels, or hidden communication between sender and receiver. Those channels are used by terrorists, information thieves, and spies. Now I'll show you a slide that provides some evidence of that in just a second. The extent of this is such that researchers at MIT, the University of Warsaw, and others are greatly concerned, and they have urged that studies be commissioned to investigate practical solutions, and my study is one of the responses to those urgings of the research community. So I'd like to show you an example of a scenario, starting at the top. In this scenario, you are not the target. You're what's called the carrier. You're doing your normal transmissions, and in that process, someone who's either compromised the access point or who has offered up a false access point has the opportunity to use your communications to steal data. The attacker's goal is to prevent detection while stealing credit card numbers, social security numbers, or any personally identifiable information. Side goal is, if detected, the FBI or Secret Service knocks on your door and not the thieves' door. So in step one, you would log into a wireless access point. In step two, the wireless access point does what it does, which is translate wireless frames into wired frames, or 802.11 to 802.3 frames. If there's unused space in one of those wired frames as it's headed out to the internet, then the attacker stores a social security number or some other bit of information in that unused field. And then we get to step 5. That's the question of my study, is will the firewall detect that there's been the insertion of data in one of those unused fields, or will it carry on as before? Continuing with this scenario, the attacker now translates the address of the packet, or the destination address of the packet, to his or her own server, extracts the hidden information, then reformats the packet to its original destination address, which is where you intended it to go, and sends it. In the end, no one is the wiser, and all this happens in milliseconds. So there's a historical perspective to network steganography. And my research showed that the literature can be divided into three periods. Period one was a physical period that dates back about 2,500 years. Period two began the logical establishment of the theories that are now used in period three, the current era, to leverage network packets for covert channels. So period one, as I mentioned, began in about 2,500 years ago. And to read the historian's approach, there was a general by the name of Histiaeus who wanted to communicate with another war general. And the idea was to shave the head of a servant, tattoo a secret message on the servant's head, allow the hair to grow back in weeks or months, and then send the messenger along his way, and it worked quite well. 2,000 years later, a scientist by the name of Trithemius created the foundation for both cryptography and steganography. The work was called Steganographia, and the first two volumes are the foundation for modern steganography. The last volume became the foundation for cryptography. And the evolution of those volumes is pretty simple. There were secret incantations. Remember, this was several hundred years ago, that Trithemius invoked spirits to carry secret messages using covers. However, the method became so advanced that the cover was no longer necessary, and I think you can see the relationship between steganography, which requires a carrier, and cryptography, which is in plain sight but obfuscated. 150 years after Trithemius, there was a German Jesuit by the name of Gaspari Scott who created the first instance of using steganography in practice. He hid it inside of musical notes. And then we move into the theoretical area. And there were two seminal studies that formed the core of the theoretical area. One was by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Butler Lamson, who worked at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. And you'll recall that Xerox Palo Alto Research Center is the birthplace of the mouse. Dr. Douglas Engelbart, the Ethernet, Dr. Robert Metcalf, and Dr. Lamson was one of the people at Xerox PARC who looked into something called a covert channel, covert storage channels and covert timing channels. The other significant theoretical work in period two was done by Simmons 1984. And that work created something called the prisoner's problem. Imagine two prisoners who have a plan to escape. The problem is they're not in the same cell. And every message that they pass to coordinate their escape activity must be handed to a warden. So the idea is to give the warden a message that looks like one thing, but is actually another. So those two theories, the idea of having a covert storage channel and an active warden, which in this case, or in my study, is a firewall or any kind of network security device that's looking at and doing packet inspection. The idea is founded in the concepts first laid down by Lamson and Simmons in 1984. The modern era began in 1996 at Los Alamos Labs with Handel and Sanford, who first introduced the concept of storing messages inside of protocol data units or inside of TCP headers. It was advanced by Rowland about a year later, Rowland 1997, who not only took the concepts of Handel and Sanford and expanded upon them, but also wrote and published the actual source code on how to do that. Fast forward to 2002, we get the story from USA Today that alleges that Osama bin Laden used file-based steganography. He used a variation, according to USA Today, of the hide-then-seek method, which is a least significant bit method that modifies pictures to plan both the 9/11 attack as well as the Kenyan embassy bombs. What's interesting is that SANS published a refutation of that report, stating that based on their analysis of the internet as it existed in 2002, that steganography was too complicated for, and these are Sands author's words, lazy terrorists to use. So fast forward again to 2010, and the illegals, a group of Russian agents from the Foreign Intelligence Service, were arrested for using steganography. Specifically, they would meet with their Russian handlers at a coffee shop, connect via wireless, and upload information, state secrets, to their handlers, who would then carry it back to Russia. Now, that's not a trivial source. That's based on Department of Justice documentation and the information associated with the cases. 2011, McAfee discovers what's been designated Operation Shady Rat. They found a server that was a command and control server. They did forensics on it and found that when a machine is first compromised, the way it establishes what its command and control server will be is to examine what appears to be a picture, but that picture contains an IP address, and that IP address is actually the IP address of the command and control server that it will use. This hampers the forensic investigation to determine the communication between the bot and the command and control server. So we see that network steganography is not just a threat for those attempting to keep personal information confidential, but also to help thieves exfiltrate information. So given the predictions that firewalls are insufficient by the scholarly literature, here is what I proposed. The question is, can peer-reviewed assertions be demonstrated statistically? The general problem relates to outbound permeability, regardless of method. The specific problem is to determine the permeability of network security appliances using network steganography. As I mentioned, the goal is to determine the impact of firewall defenses on exfiltration. 8.0, or the null hypothesis, predicts that there will be no difference in exfiltration resistance regardless of the firewall defensive posture. In order to accept 8.0, the obtained value, in the case of my study, the critical value was 1.97. The obtained value must exceed or must be less than the critical value. And the p-value for an alpha of 0.5, in order to accept 8.0, must be greater than alpha. In order to accept the research hypothesis, or H1, the obtained value that I got from my test must be greater than the critical value, and the p-value must be less than the alpha of 0.5. And that defines statistical significance. The dependent variable I used in my study had a level of measurement that was ratio, interval with a possibility of absolute 0. I calculated the dependent variable by dividing the covert bit count by the overt bit count. The covert bit count was 16, which conformed to the square root law of steganography, which states that the bit count, the overt bit count, the square root of the overt bit count, must be greater than the number of bits specified in the covert payload. In this case, the overt payload bits were calculated by adding up the size of the IP datagram, 20 bytes, the size of the UDP datagram, or specifically the UDP header, which was 8 bytes, and the UDP payload, which was variable. Then I multiplied by 8 to get the bit count and divided that into the covert bit count. The result was the percentage of size that the covert bit count was of the overt bit count. So the independent variable for the study was nominal. It was dichotomous. It was by its 0 value represented defenses being down. If the defenses on the firewall were up, the value of the independent variable was 1. There was a theoretical precedent with that. Again, Simmons, 1984, provided a precedent for inactive versus active wardens, which corresponds to the 0 or 1 or active or inactive state of the firewall defenses. That was a theoretical precedent. There was an applied precedent by Bacom 2011 in his study of intrusion detection devices, and he also just associated defense state with 0 or 1. In the bottom part of this graphic, I show the cause and effect that I expect. The independent variable will measure the impact of the exfiltration on the dependent variable. Successful intervention will take one of two forms. The firewall will transform the IP ID to something other than what the attacker intended it to be, or the firewall will drop the packet completely. As I mentioned, disabled defenses represent a false independent variable state, and enabled defenses represent an enabled defensive state. Let's walk through this diagram from right to left. 10.1.1.11 on the far right, that was my control station. It was a Windows 2012 server that I used to begin the SSH sessions into both the sender, receiver, and the firewall. 10.1.1.10 was the sender itself. Same program that ran on the sender also ran on the receiver. It was invoked with two different arguments. Based on one set of arguments, it generated steganograms. Based on another set of arguments, specifically the name of the output file, it operated on the receiver, 10.2.2.20. So again, 10.1.1.11 on the far right was the control server, where I used the SSH session, and ultimately, once the test was concluded, brought the data back to load into SPSS. This was a completely self-contained network. 10.1.1.10 was the client workstation, where the SynthArm program, the C++ program that I developed, generated what are called steganograms, which are normal datagrams with a hidden payload inside. The traffic from 10.1.1.10 flowed through the Cisco ASA5505. It had an internal interface of .1, 10.1.1.1, and an external interface, which represents the untrusted network of 10.2.2.1. The receiving workstation was 10.2.2.20 on the far left. It ran another instance, as I mentioned, of the SynthArm program and received the payload. So the manipulation of the independent variable happened on the Cisco ASA5505. The storage of, or the calculation of the dependent variable, calculating the average number of covert bits that were received on 10.2.2.20, happened on the far left. Now you'll notice that I don't have I evaluated two devices. First, I evaluated a Cisco ASA5505 and an IP tables Linux firewall, so a security appliance and an open source piece of software. During this represents phase one. For the second phase of the test, I replaced the ASA5505 with the Linux IP tables firewall, and the Linux IP tables firewall had the same IP address, so the 10.1.1.10 and the outside host 10.2.2.20, there was no difference. It kept the same default gateway. The only difference was, theoretically, as part of the test, was there might be some difference between the operation or the successful prevention of exfiltration of a hardware firewall versus an open source firewall. Okay, so now that I've established the foundation for the goals, the question, the purpose, and the before and after design of the test, these were the results. The results showed the defenses on both the ASA 5505 and the Linux IP table firewalls did not prevent the exfiltration of steganograms. Let's take the ASA 5505 first. The null hypothesis was accepted at an alpha of 0.05. The evidence supporting the acceptance of the null hypothesis was conclusive. At an alpha of 0.05, the p-value was greater than alpha. The obtained value was negative 0.179, which was less than the critical value, 1.97. The effect size, I used the effect sizes from Dr. Jacob Cohen, the creator of Cohen's D, where ranges of 0.2 represents small effect, 0.4 represents a medium effect, and 0.8 represents a large effect. Based on the reported effect size, it was small and less than a small effect. The correlation shows, the correlation coefficient shows no correlation between the independent variable and the dependent variable. What will we expect to see in a security appliance? We would expect to see a negative correlation. We expect with the dichotomous independent variable, as it went from 0 or unprotected to 1 protected, you'd expect to see the number of steganographic bits exfiltrated go from non-zero to 0. So you expect a negative number as, or -1 in the perfect scenario. The correlation observed here was again very small. So how representative was the lab I showed you in the last slide? How representative of that of the greater population? The confidence interval shows that 66 millionths of the average covert payload size, which is a very narrow margin. As you'll see in a bit, the standard error, I did not provide that slide, but the standard error was similarly small. Both of these suggest that the sampling frame and the data I observed was similar to what we could expect to see with the entire population. Similar results for the IP tables, Linux software firewall. Again, 8.0 was accepted. There was no difference. At an alpha of 0.05, the obtained value was less than 1.97. The effect size was smaller than the 0.2 Cohen's d mark or threshold for a small effect. Correlation efficient was hovering close to 0 as opposed to -1 or +1. And the confidence interval, again, was measured in the millionths of the average covert size, again, offering us the confidence that the sample data is representative of the entire population. Interpretations. Real-world results were consistent with the statistical results. What should have happened in the real world is packets should have been dropped. They weren't. That's why you had a dependent variable that wasn't 0. As I mentioned, as the independent variable increased, the dependent variable should have decreased. It did not. There was no negative correlation. The effect sizes were minuscule. If you take a look at the bottom of the screen, the heart of the test was to take the mean values, the grand mean of the sampling distribution of the before and after states. If you subtract, if the before state is smaller than the after state, you end up with a negative value. If the before state is larger than the after state, even by a small amount, the result is positive. So the idea here is even if you take the effect sizes that I observed for the Linux and Cisco boxes and made them absolute values, they're still much smaller. Take a look at the far left there at 0.2, much smaller than the small threshold for a small effect. The literature suggested that everything has to be taken in context. You can't just take the numbers and say because the effect size was small, because the statistical significance wasn't there, because the correlation coefficient, there was very low covariance, and conclusively decide that there was nothing there. Everything has to be examined in context. So what I wanted to show you was what this should have looked like. And the X's represent what a successful intervention should have looked like. Let's take the ping. This is with the firewall in a completely well-defended state. Ping on the far right did not get through from sender to receiver because it was using ICMP and it wasn't explicitly allowed. The SNORC and the Caragen, you remember, the SNORC attack did not get through, nor did the Caragen attack get through. They happen to be 20-year-old attacks, and the firewall is very used to that sort of thing, so it did a great job with it. What shouldn't have happened is the NTP. That packet carried a covert payload, and that should have been dropped as well. But if you take a look at the bottom, you'll see that it made it through just fine. Because all the firewall did was look at if the destination port was 123. If 123 matched what was in its ACL, good to go. That's not the level of sophistication we need to see in order to protect the network steganography. So in summary, the hardware and software firewalls did not demonstrate statistically or from a real-world perspective that they can prevent network steganographic exfiltration. This is not something that I considered out of the blue. It was done after thorough literature review. And one of the things that I found in the literature was the urging, as I mentioned, by network steganography researchers that some practical preventions be applied. Well, although not covered here, I provide some descriptive statistics in my dissertation that show, I would say, a fairly excessive focus on exploitation, very little on detection, and even less on prevention. So I think more research is required to determine better ways to detect and prevent exfiltration attacks from moving personally identifiable information into places where it shouldn't be. And I'll now open it to questions. Thank you.
Robert, this is Dr. Warner. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I do have some questions for you, sir. So my first question that I have for you is, if you were to do this all over again, what changes would you make?
I'm just going to try to turn up the volume. I heard your question, but it was a little hard. I'm going to turn up the volume here.
You see the volume icon right there at the lower, right there, yeah.
I'm already up there.
Okay.
The screen is.
So great question. If you noticed, the port that I used for the exfiltration in my study was UDP port 123. And there's a specific Internet Engineering Task Force RFC out there on how those packets should be formatted. I didn't do that. Originally, I'd intended to use UDP port 514, which is for syslog. And that's why you saw the messages out there that said so-and-so logged onto this server, did that, and did that. But I thought it was implausible that there wouldn't be any real-world scenario where someone would be sending syslog messages to the outside world. So I asked, what would someone be sending? What would an administrator in a typical network environment be sending? And I arrived at NTP, or Network Time Protocol, for 123. But I did not change the human readable text. Ideally, what you got going to an NTP server are numbers. So if I had it to do over again, I would conform the test to meet the RFC for NTP, so it'll be consistent from end to end. But I will say that I think it shows that there's an opportunity for firewalls in that they let the Cisco firewall and the Linux firewall let an improperly formatted message that was clearly not conformant to the RFC pass through. So there was a positive result from the inconsistency, but if I had it to do it over again, I'd make sure it was conformant.
Excellent. I have another question for you. So, in your opinion, how generalizable do you feel your study is?
I think very generalizable. I think you've heard me use RFC and IETF quite a few times. Those are the standards that govern the internet. So if you have an environment, a couple $1,000s in equipment that conforms to IPv4, then you can reproduce the results of this study, or any researcher who wants to. The devices themselves were standard devices, ASA 5505, entry-level firewall, not running anything special, running version 8.4, which was the lowest level stable release that I found. The operating systems, Linux or CentOS version 5.8. Again, it's the Community Enterprise Linux, which is the source code compatible version of the Red Hat Linux. Everything that I used in my study is easily available, and the results, given the export of a couple of CSV files and importing those into IBM SPSS, or if you're really crafty into Excel with your own formulation or calculations, was easily reproducible.
Excellent, thank you. Again, I have another question for you. One of the things that Capital does stress to the students, either before they enter the program or once they have entered it, is that this program will allow them to influence policymakers. So my question for you is, how would a policymaker be able to utilize your findings?
I'm sorry, how would a policymaker utilize what?
I'm sorry, Robert. How do you think that a policymaker would be able to utilize the findings that you have here in your study?
So if I were a policymaker, or if I were speaking to a policymaker, I would want to know what the overall risk posture was of the organization. If that risk posture resulted in policies, written policies, which means that the organization is serious about preventing data exfiltration, then one of the things that they could do is use this to form a well-formed requirement for the type of testing, penetration, exfiltration testing, that should be done to demonstrate that any device that they get actually prevents the exfiltration of data. And I would also advise them to, I think they would also want to invest in some folks who understand protocol and the abuse of protocols, and also put that into policies to prevent abuse such as what I demonstrated with the commonly available Linux utilities.
Okay, great. I promise I'm not going to stretch this out, but I do have a couple more questions for you.
Sure, I'm ready.
You're doing great. So two more things really, and then I'll stop and turn this over to the committee. How did your coursework at Capital Technology University prepare you for your dissertation work?
Significantly. The most important course I took, I wish I could remember the number, but it was the second or third course where we went through the literature and associated the literature with what we thought might be the direction of our study.
8:30.
8:30, thank you. Why this was so important. I had a passion for networking. I had two ideas. This was the second. The reason I took this was because for the first, I found no literature to support. Without literature to support it, it was just my own professional experience, which is wonderful and supplemented or added to something that goes back to Residency 1. Who says and who cares? So if there's something out there that no one cares about, no one's written about, I'm actually designing to a dead end. So I thought 830 was a great class to help me work to determine which of my ideas actually had the support necessary to take it all the way to fruition. The other thing I think I mentioned was Dr. Pittman's 810. I had a really tough time, Dr. Lerner, you might remember a few emails from me, a really tough time with 80 and H1. As an experienced networking professional, I felt that I should know that this would work, and I should go out and prove that it didn't work. And understanding what null hypothesis testing was all about, and in order to be unbiased, that I couldn't set off and prove anything, and I had to really focus on what difference is really all about, and how to measure difference. And the term statistical significance, I heard more than 100 times in 810. It finally set in, and I understood the importance of being unbiased, and more importantly, what that looks like in the execution of a properly conducted study. What I believe is a properly conducted study. You will tell me if it's properly conducted.
That's another great answer, thank you, and I appreciate you not mentioning any of the classes that we had together. So,
I'm sorry, Dr. Leonard, that last part. You appreciate me what?
I appreciate you not mentioning any of the classes that we had together.
I'm sitting here worried about who taught 8:30. Did he have me or Emily?
So, Robert, my last question for you is of course directed to you, but I think the answer is for any of the folks who are in the audience today who are also students at Capital in either of the doctoral programs. So I look forward to your answer to this question, and it's basically, I want to know what advice that you would give to a student who is starting the dissertation process, and in addition to that, what advice would you give to a student who's starting the dissertation process and considers using the methodology that you used in your study?
For the first one, what advice would I give to a student? 3 words. Checklist, checklist, checklist. There is nothing more deflating than to pour your heart out into something that really doesn't impact study, what it's going to look like. And although I fought with the checklist, I think it's made me a better scholar and it made my study better. I know it's made my study better. I think I really understand what that's all about. So I would advise anyone who wants to do this to look at the checklist, understand its intent, and use it as the framework, as the skeleton for your study. The second question, Dr. Lerner, what was that?
I'm sorry, the second question was very similar to the first. I basically wanted to know what advice that you would give to students who are starting their dissertation process and consider using the methodology that you used in your study.
Okay. The advice to anyone who will use my method is statistics first. One of the things that was really challenging about the program is it seems to find the area where you're weak and ask you to step up. And statistics was an area that I wasn't particularly strong in. But as I mentioned, everything has to be directed. I found that everything has to be directed. You have to be working towards something, whether it's a checklist, whether it's the statistical significance. So if someone were going to repeat the test, I would strongly advise them to grab Field 2013, anything written by Dr. Jacob Cohen, Statistics for Dummies, whatever it is that helps you understand how you can statistically demonstrate the results of the study.
That's an excellent answer, Robert. Thank you very much for answering all my questions this evening. You've definitely given me some more extensive insights into your research and your thought process, so I appreciate that. I have no further questions, so if any of your committee members have questions, now is the time for them to ask.
Jason or Lisa?
Yeah, this is Lisa. I have one. Hi, Robert. How are you?
I'm doing well, Doctor. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well too. Thank you so much for a great presentation and all your hard work. And so my question is, if you had time to do future research, I know you're employed, so you don't have time to sit around and do it. But if you did, or if you are planning it, what would you specifically be interested in furthering?
So the method that I used was protocol steganography, which uses storage locations. That's not exactly state of the art. What is cutting edge is timing channel steganography, which uses the timing differences between the reception times of packets to represent data. So if I've got, I don't know, let's say a 50 millisecond threshold, anything, assuming we're talking about a reliable local area network segment here, if I've got a 50 millisecond threshold, any packet received less than that is a binary 0. Any packet that takes longer than 50 milliseconds, greater than or equal to 50 milliseconds, is a binary 1, then I can store covertly without any forensic evidence left behind, even if you do have a network sniffer set up to capture packets. I can transmit those packets. And so I found that in the literature, and it just intrigued me, the number of studies that are out there and the various ways that they're using to push the detection threshold up. So if I could work on, or if I work on anything in the future, it'll be timing channel steganography. The other thing I'd like to do in the future is examining more devices. So I tried not to choose devices, but I tried to look at the literature and see what they suggested. I found NSA support for, there were actually hardening guides for the NSA 5505 and for Red Hat Linux, so I selected those because there was literature to support it, as well as Gartner saying that Cisco devices are relatively highly recommended and highly used. But I'd like to maybe take a look at some other, maybe some checkpoint software that cost prohibitive at the moment, but take a look at some other appliances and see how they stand up to the exfiltration test. Specifically, gosh, I forget the name of the organization, but there are a few manufacturers I'd like to test out.
Okay, thank you. That was all I had, and I see Jason in the Dr. Pittman in the chat said Warren covered mine, and yeah, Warren covered any other ones that I had as well. So
I have a question. If I see a lot of your recommendations here, if in the future you were to be a chair of a student based on your study, which one of those would you recommend?
I think looking at protocols beyond just IP, IPv6, looking at inter-protocol steganography or network steganography that combines attacks that use both ARP and IP, or store covert data inside multiple layers of the stack. Because experiencing each one of those gives you an understanding of what the true vulnerabilities are.
Okay.
I have a question. I'm always interested in trying to ascertain ways that the literature, the research that our students do here adds to the body of literature in the area that you do your investigation. If you had to pull your dissertation apart and write an article to a peer-reviewed journal, which piece of this do you think would be most valuable to the literature today?
That's a good question. So towards the end of the study, I found an article that brought together all of the studies related to the packet raw bitrate independent variable. I say towards the end of the study. I wish I had found it towards the beginning.
It's just the way.
It's just the way. And I really developed a different level of insight as a result. So I'd like to see the same thing. I'd like to pull out all the information on that source as relates to the dependent variable, and do a peer-reviewed article on what insights we can gain from doing a meta-analysis on those articles.
And who would you submit that article to? Any particular journal of interest?
Yeah, I grew a little frustrated with the availability of articles related to my topic in free sources. So I paid money, and I paid money to IEEE. The quality of articles was far and away above. Maybe ACM comes close. I'm not, not recommending anything. I'm just telling you my experience.
Well, we have IEEE now.
Okay. So I'd aim for IEEE.
Okay.
I published in another journal that related to business process modeling notation and had some experiences around that have led me to. But in the future, I'll only focus on ACM and IEEE.
Okay. Right.
So, are you going to publish this dissertation as a whole, or are you going to use it as pieces?
I plan to publish it as a whole.
Okay.
I didn't necessarily have an opinion about that until, again, late in the process when I saw Dr. Shelton's dissertation, Dr. Char Sample's dissertation, and because towards the end it's like, what am I building here? What should it look like? And seeing the published documentation, the published dissertations helped a lot. Watching Dr. Shelton's defense helped a lot. So I would, I definitely plan to publish it as a whole. I think there's a lot more to write about, and I don't have to worry about divvying it out in pieces.
Well, I mean, there are. It's definitely publishing it as a whole is a very helpful thing. And when we started with Lauren's, it was a great model for students and to see the whole picture. But then there's also the other side, like Jason, where he puts it out there in pieces, and students have multiple resources to speak to. So there's good things about both of them.
Absolutely.
So
I didn't mean to pass judgment on either. It's just
no, I mean there's benefits to both of them. I appreciate both being done.
Right.
So
yeah.
I just appreciate it being published because there's a lot that can't be. So
one of the things that one of the first studies I read before I actually started talking to Dr. Lerner about possibly being my chair was his study, and there was a lot of conversation about how long should a dissertation be, and it was very helpful to see a dissertation that was short, concise, to the point, no fluff.
well, we got one that was 400 pages. I don't want them that are 400 pages. Thank you very much.
Takes a little while to review.
Well, but in my case, I have to read this thing multiple times. Now we have a different process in place for approving. So I don't touch the dissertation on the front end. The teams do. So I only generally have to read it once when it gets to IRB, ARB. But 400 pages is a lot. Now this will be a book, and it's Jamie Carroll.
Quality is there. It's just long.
Right, and it almost reads like it's going to be a book. If you were to look at it like a normal dissertation, you would say, you don't need all this stuff. I can take out 100 pages without even thinking. But then when he told us what his purpose was, it made more sense. And I think that students, and this is for the benefit of the students that are listening, students need to know what their purpose is.
Right.
And Dr. Carroll knew he was doing a book.
Right.
If you're doing a dissertation to get the job done, you should be under 200 pages.
Right.
How many pages is yours? 180?
211.
Yeah.
Total.
So, well, but you have a few more tables in your end than most do. So,
appendix aside, I think it's like 170 or so.
Right.
Right.
So that's about right. So this is a normal size, and whether you're 180 or you're 211 depends on what you have in your back matter.
Right.
So qualitative doesn't have as much back matter. You're not doing hard statistics, so we're not going to see as much as that. Frequently, you'll see the tables within the chapters. So statistics that you spoke to, we have changed. Did you have Jamie Carroll for
I did.
the 860?
I didn't have the course here. No.
Okay, so we've changed the course.
Okay.
And we're getting some more hard stats, and then we're going to encourage the student to take as one of their electives Jason's 815, which is quantitative. And in that, they will definitely get what they need in order to help them master the statistics necessary for this. And it won't matter which degree you're in, you'll be able to take that course.
Awesome.
So, and we did, the first 6 or 7 cohorts coming through really helped us, well, which do they need? It's easier to self-learn qualitative, I think, as a qualitative researcher, than it is to understand the statistics if you've not done them, quantitative. So we kind of had to measure that. So we've made some changes in terms of that. And then we're also going to offer an additional 1 credit opportunity for students to work with a faculty member in a class on weekend seminars over a few weeks to be able to work on their own statistics as they're developing their document before they go to a chair.
That's fantastic. It's a huge resource. As I mentioned, I probably spent more time on that because there's no one book to go to. And there's no one study. And there were very few security studies.
Right.
Which opened the gateway, which was a gap for me in a good way, that combine a rigorous statistical approach with a security study. It's an excellent resource.
What was the most challenging part of this investigation for you?
The end. So there's a period when you're writing 4 and 5 where it's all together. It's a beautiful mind thing. It's all in your head. And then there's the after. And keeping that all top of mind and reading the dissertation. One of the things Dr. Giulianelli and Dr. Lerner emphasized was read your own dissertation. And that's a chore. Even though you wrote it and you're supposed to know it, it's a chore.
Read it 6 months from now.
Oh my, I can't imagine. It'd be like someone else wrote it. So
you'll be like, did I write that? Wow.
Anticipating, I have to do a few presentations in my job and always try to anticipate tough questions. And anticipating those tough questions and trying to make sure that you know your own dissertation I knew my own dissertation was probably the toughest part.
Okay.
And we have had people fail because they didn't know their dissertation.
Yes.
Oh my. Well, that's part of the point of the oral, right? Is to make sure you wrote it.
Yep. We've had several. They insisted to their team they were ready, so the team got tired of arguing. Let them go.
We're not ready.
It's a battle you don't want to win.
So. Okay, so shall we step out to the library and do Warren, you want to initiate a conference call?
If you can do me a favor, go to meeting and pause the recording, please.
Dr. Barker, do you want me to include you on that?
So, are we on, Dr. Flowers? Thank you very much. Well done. They all agreed that you have been a pleasure to work with, and they've all done lots of dissertations, and you're at the top of the heap as far as they're concerned.
That's very high praise. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. You guys out there have anything to say to him? You can let
Robert. Sorry, this is Dr. Walker. Before everybody starts to chime in, I just want to congratulate you on a job well done.
It was Greg.
In addition to that, go on, Greg. Oh boy, lots of feedback. Dr. Giulianelli, can you mute the mic, please?
Did I get permission to speak now?
Yes.
This question is, first of all,
Rob,
Want to get the mics back?
I will. I just wanted to say something briefly to Robert, and I just got overrun. Robert, it was a pleasure doing this with you. I appreciate your clear thought and your willingness to follow direction. You've done an excellent job. You deserve this, and you've earned it. Make sure that you thank your family because that's very important. And please stay in touch with me so I can attend your graduation.
Thank you, Dr. Leonard. It's been a pleasure working with you. I learned a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Fla.
Thank you, Dr. Flower.
I'd like to congratulate you too, Dr. Flowers. This is Lisa, and I'd like to ditto everything Warren said. Yeah, just such a pleasure to work with, and congratulations. And yeah, definitely, I'd love to know when the graduation plans as well. I hope to be able to attend.
Thank you, Dr. Giulianelli. You'll definitely receive an invitation.
Oh, thank you, and I think you reflect well on the university.
Appreciate that. Very high praise.
My name is Greg Blank.
Greg, you started and then you cut out.
Yeah, okay. I think I lost my audio. Anyhow, my name is Greg Blanche. I'm a second-year student. Our cohort started our continuation of our program last month. My question to you now, Dr. Flowers, with respect to the dissertation process, what would you say was the most challenging chapter that you had to deal with respect to the writing process?
They were all hard in a different way. I really thought chapter 2 was going to be a breeze, but it was a lot harder than I thought, simply because we've got this mass of literature. I think I had about 181 sources. I tried a variety of techniques. I tried to be a little bit more quantitative and just tried to describe what I saw. I tried to be more do a methodological approach. Chapter 2 took me longer than anything else. How about I use that as a yardstick? Chapter 4 was a lot of fun. I didn't have to cite anything. I mean, I did, but it was really just reporting the results of my study. So it was me in a room with a bunch of computers and writing up results. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, sir.
I'd like to, first of all, congratulate you again and echo the sentiments that my colleagues have. I must say that I've been doing this for a while, and you are probably one of the most patient ABD folks that I've run into. And I'd also like to thank your committee because we've been trying to juggle and get dates for this defense, and not one time did you scoff at how long it was taking me to get everybody together. And,
At least in front of us.
At least, right. And I really appreciate that. But for those of you who I have a chance to work with for the first time in this defense situation, I like to thank you because this is not an easy task to pull all the parties that have to participate together. And so you guys didn't jump up and down and scream and holler at me either. And it certainly is great to work with people who have the spirit of teamwork and were able to make this work, particularly for you, Dr. Flowers. So you make my job a lot easier when we play as a team. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your work with the assistant director and the dean, because I think I was telling you when you came in, my wife's comment was every time when someone gets involved, whether it's my committee or the deans, something positive happens. So I think it's very challenging for you. This program has grown a great deal, and it's got to be challenging with a lot of folks who need a lot of care and attention like we do.
Mm-hmm.
Frequent contacts and guidance, maybe a little too much, but I really appreciate everything that the committee did, their patience with me, and most of all, I think my wife is on the phone. thank you for putting up with me and for being a really supportive element. Without you, there's no way that I could have gotten this done. No doubt.
Okay. All right. Let's let them get out of here. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Warren and Lisa.
You're very welcome. Have a good evening.
You too. Feel better.
Signing sheet. How do I facilitate that?